And I hear it so often in organisations, this disconnect between IT and quotes the business. And my thought is that unless you're an overtly software or IT organisation, the business is why the organisation exists, not IT. IT provides a service. And it reminded me of my first lecture, my undergraduate degree many years ago. A guy called John Craig, and the lecture was called Infrastructure. And he started by saying, can anyone define infrastructure? We were all young and dumb and we had no idea. And he said, well, infra means beneath structure. It's the stuff that makes society run. It's the pipes, the valves, the plumbing, the wiring, the electricity. It's all that stuff that you don't generally see but you rely on. And it made me think that an IT function provides that service to an organisation, or should, if that organisation's function is not primarily software or technical. But so often I see a disconnect between the business and IT. I had a CIO a while back said in a meeting with their colleagues in IT, you know, the business, quote, the business views us in the same way they would view janitorial services. We provide a vital service, but we're an overhead. We've got to work, people notice if we don't. But to be entirely relevant to the business, we've got to make sure that people value us. We don't just deploy things for the sake of it. And so often in IT I hear people saying, well, our job is to deploy and that's it. I would argue it isn't. Your job is to deploy stuff with an overt business value. Your job is to ensure that what you deploy meets a need and that people will make a personal decision to embrace, adopt and use what you have deployed. Your function does not stop with deployment. We know that critical infrastructure investments aside, the vast majority of a return of investment for an IT initiative comes from people adopting it. And we know that the ROI for a people-dependent change comes from speed of adoption, ultimate utilisation and proficiency, and that is dependent not on IT, but dependent on excellent change management. When I hear IT organisations saying our job is to deploy the stuff, well, yeah, of course it is. You've got to build it and make sure it's secure, it works. But you've got to take the extra step, I would argue, ensure excellent change management to ensure that people actually adopt. Otherwise, what's the point in spending money on stuff that has poor adoption? And I said in an earlier video, the global consequence of lack of adoption over the last several years has been $900 billion of failed digital transformations. And that's massive. That cannot be sustainable. And I would argue for any IT investment that's dependent on adoption and people embracing, adopting and using, we've got to do excellent change management. We know with excellent change management we're 6 times more likely to meet or exceed our project objectives than with poor, and that's got to be worth doing, right? So, infrastructure, it's required, it's there. Let's make sure that there isn't a disconnect between IT and the business. IT exists to service the business. It's got to be integrated with it. It's got to be delivering value. If it doesn't, well, you're only going to look at the average tenure of a CIO. Not that long. And I would argue the reason it's not that long often is because the lack of attention to the business and adoption of the stuff that's being deployed. I hope that helped.